Глупые вы, глупые. Но по что вы спрашиваете? Каждого мы видим, из каждого спросим. Вы как на выставке перед нами. Мы глядим во все глаза, кто что делает, кто что думает, кто чего помнит. Правда в памяти. У кого нет памяти, у того нет и жизни.
All the world's oldest religions involved some form of physical communion with nature, whether through the imbibing of certain entheogenic plants or the ritual enactment of patterns in the natural world. In both cases, self-sacrifice was required. To truly reconnect with the earth, there is some part of the individual, large or small, that must first die unto itself, as the individual becomes a leaf, or a tree, or as they set out on an inner journey from which they may never return at all. The word religion itself comes from the Latin relogio, meaning to reconnect. In the developed West, here meaning the world as such, we have lost religion, at least in its proper sense. And with it we have lost that connection both to our surroundings and to ourselves. Thunder is no longer the voice of an angry god. No river contains a spirit. No snake the embodiment of wisdom. No mountain cave the home of a great demon. No voices now speak to man from stones, plants and animals, nor does he speak to them thinking they can hear. His contact with nature has gone, and with it has gone the profound emotional energy that this symbolic connection supplied. But no matter, this process of reconnection is underway regardless, whether we know it or not. For in spite of our stubborn and ultimately ill-fated attempts to gain mastery over nature, to wield it like a tool in carrying out our wicked wills, certain seismic events are taking place, events that are outside of our control. The eschaton is a concept that appears in all mystical and religious schools of thought. It's the end of the world as we know it, the end of reality, the ultimate reunification with the divine. For philosopher and ethnobotanist Terence McKenna, world history, or the human species per se, is merely the appearance of this transition, of one form of consciousness changing into another.
I would argue that the presence of human civilization on this planet is the strongest evidence we have that matter and organizational processes are about to make some kind of a leap to a new order of being. What history is the 25,000-year transition zone. Before you enter the zone, you're an animal. After you leave the zone, you're a god. But for 25,000 years, you're kind of an animal and kind of a god. And you're constantly being swamped by your animal nature, and then great teachers are appearing and dragging people back to the right line. And we are schizophrenic in history.
All our oldest stories end with a conflict of some sort, a battle between the forces of good and those of evil. Finally, these two foundational elements, upon which the whole of reality is grounded, unleash their full might upon one another. And in our age of insatiable consumption, of pervasive, mind-numbing addiction to social media, fast food, and whatever else we use to help us through the days, something speaks in opposition. If you listen hard enough, you can hear it. It's calling our species back to itself.
Слышь, не все. Не вся правда тут. Люди, вы люди, их чего захотели, им всю правду подавай. Ишь чего. Иди до конца, пока ноги несут, глаза видят. Сколько написано, столь иди, а потом мы встретимся. Тогда и узнаете.
Larissa Shepitko was a Ukrainian filmmaker active during the 60s and 70s. What is perhaps most striking about her work is the dramatic relationship between her characters and their environments. It's a relationship that was mirrored in the director's famously committed shooting process. During filming of her 1963 film Heat, she got sick with hepatitis and was forced to direct certain sequences from a stretcher. Moreover, temperatures there on the Kazakh steppe were so high that the film stock melted. I suspect this may also account for this mark that tarnishes so many of the film's most beautiful shots. In The Ascent, meanwhile, well, yeah, conditions were different. During this television interview, she told a story about how she went to inspect a group of extras who were huddled under a tree waiting for the cameras to start rolling. Noticing that nearly every one of them had black specks all over their hands, a sure sign of frostbite, she asked them why they hadn't been wearing their gloves. Women and children alike replied that they wanted to be as authentic as possible. It was their way of honouring the memory of those they were portraying. This dedication and commitment to the process was undoubtedly one that carried over from their director, a woman who, at various points during her short career, was hospitalised in a sanatorium, damaged her spine, and during childbirth endured a near-death experience, none of which affected her prolific output. In a male-dominated industry, this very particular, even hypermasculine approach to filmmaking made her an anomaly. But by her own admission, and in spite of the influence of Tarkovsky, Bresson, and her great mentor, Alexander Dovzhenko, it was her uniquely feminine perspective that was bringing something new to the form. I do differentiate between films made by women and those made by men, because there's no such thing as a female cinema and a male cinema. There is the sentimental and the serious. A woman, while being an equal half of what is our human nature, is able to share amazing things with the world. Not a single man is able to grasp certain phenomena in the psyche of human beings on such a deep, intuitive level as a woman. An example of this is the director's treatment of the machine. It's an abiding image in Soviet cinema. For Eisenstein, Vertov, and the aforementioned Alexander Dovzhenko, the machine is revered, even venerated. More, in a cinematic extension of Marxist theory as a whole, humans themselves become machines. Or not even that, for in this warped philosophy, the machine is God. Instead, human individuals become as mere nodes in the societal machine. Individuals which are entirely expendable, so long as there is some ready-cut clone ready to fill the same spot.
Повторяю, на сегодняшний день мы можем решить проблемы, так сказать, научно-технической революции. Мы можем создать совершенную технику, мы можем совершить чудеса в открытии науки. Но кто будет владеть этой техникой, в чьих руках она окажется? От этого зависит моральное здоровье общества. Вот почему нам не безразлично, в чьих руках будет эти завоевания науки и техники. И в конечном счете, так сказать, не материальная обеспеченность, не технический прогресс определит высокий уровень общества. Не только это. А самое главное, нравственное, высокое нравственное гармоническое развитие человека. От того, насколько духовно наше общество, будет зависеть его здоровье. Если общество духовно, оно имеет не только прошлое, но именно имеет настоящее. И главное, оно будет иметь будущее. Если оно бездуховно, оно бесперспективно.
So here, the machine is always competing with nature. The machine in nature. The machine in nature. The machine being swallowed by nature. Nature in the machine. Nature in the machine. Nature consuming the machine. It's like a wrestling match between spirituality and the human ego. They compete for dominance in the frame. And for Larissa Shepitko, nature, spirit, always wins. I deliberately chose unfashionably gendered phrasing for the title of this video. In fact, I don't think it's coincidental, or for that matter sexist, for writers like Jung to only really refer to man or mankind in their work. I think it's written in that way because men are the category being addressed. Those who would benefit most from what is being said. There is, after all, no heroine's journey, Maureen Murdoch's exceptional book on the subject notwithstanding. This opinion would seem to be in contradiction to the most enduring Western origin myth. In the Garden of Eden, it was Eve who ate the apple, woman who triggered our species' fall. The most obvious explanation for this, particularly by those with a certain political outlook, is that the perceived weakness or even duplicity of the feminine in Christian myths such as these is yet another example of the patriarchy's vilification of women, a way of keeping them in their place. But in the way I am presenting it here, the entire history and development of the human is a hero's journey. One where it is the masculine spirit which strives against himself and the forces of the world. The woman here acts as the psychopomp, spiritual guide, the embodiment of divinity. Because what teacher wouldn't give their student a little push all the way out of the garden, particularly if, as would be typical of a unique kind of male aversion, they were unwilling to go. For the goal of the hero's journey is actualization. This state of psychological wholeness is a place I would argue that women already inhabit, or at least one that the feminine already inhabits, for the two are not the same thing. The kind of woman I'm speaking of is not necessarily as pervasive as womankind. Certainly it isn't in our culture, because in the developed West, patriarchal norms turn everyone who function effectively in it into variations of the competing male, regardless of biology. And yet, despite the corruptive quality of our culture, there is a special kind of feminine spirit that subsists. Any man who has ever been truly nursed, in the root sense of the word, will know what I mean. Nourished by the mere presence of an angel, temporarily taking the form of a mother, grandmother, or that random woman who spoke to you on the tube when you couldn't contain the tears. There's a seraphic quality there that no man, however kind and gentle, can ever fully embody in the same way. In Farewell, Larissa Shepitko's final work, biological man and machine are practically synonymous, and they are pitted against the forces of the natural world. At the beginning of the story, the inhabitants of Matyora are informed that their home is to be flooded to make way for a dam. And so, this tiny, isolated village becomes as battleground for a final showdown that will determine the destiny of our species. And despite the dam, the flood, the steady drive of technologically charged societies towards suicide, there will be, can only be, one winner. The irony, however, is that in this great cosmic conflict, we poor, confused, fallen creatures don't lose at all. Not really. We've been driving our bulldozers in the wrong direction. The floodwaters will show us that. One way or another, harmony will be restored. There's a scene early on that epitomizes the relationship that the natives of this almost mythical place have with their environment and with the world. Science, which incidentally is our new religion, tells us that all is energy and vibration. Watching this sequence play out, I'm reminded of chladni plates. Sounds are played through the metal plate, causing the grains to harmonize into these geometric shapes, which change depending on the frequency and pitch. So what is dance if not the symbolic representation of harmony between we who dance and the world? Song 2, this same harmony in phonic form. Because as science again teaches us, nothing is still. Everything thrums. Everything harmonious is in motion. The simple, dignified life of these villagers is closer in spirit to what philosopher Jean Gebser called the archaic mind, that which is continuous with the mind of nature. For Terence McKenna, it's a mode of being which holds tremendous potential.
The archaic holds answers, but it only holds answers if we are willing to think of the universe as a living, intelligent entity with which we are in partnership, not set against, but that in fact we are a part of a morphogenetic intent and an unfolding reality that is larger than human understanding. Imagine larger than human understanding.
From the living fountain of instinct flows everything that is creative. Hence the unconscious is not merely conditioned by history, but is the very source of the creative impulse. It is like nature herself, prodigiously conservative, and yet transcending her own historical conditions in her acts of creation. Farewell is not Larissa Shepitko's film. For her husband, fellow filmmaker Elem Klimov, who completed the film after her death, it would have been her defining artistic statement. Ultimately, however, the mere title proved preemptively prophetic. While scouting for locations, she died in a car crash, along with 4 members of her production team. What remains is unsatisfactory, an unresolved piece of work, remaining, however, both a warning to mankind and an invocation, saying, stop fighting the current, let go, drown.